Nobody on Dock Ring 9 expected an execution at breakfast. The mining station smelled like hot metal, recycled sweat, and bad coffee when the alarm klaxons changed pitch and every worker in the central concourse stepped aside. Through the crowd came four armored slavers dragging a girl named Syl in torn silver cloth, her wrists bound in a restraint field bright enough to sting the eyes. She couldn't have been much older than Caleb Mercer. Fear hollowed her face, but she still carried herself like someone born expecting people to kneel. That was why the captain meant to kill her. Caleb watched from the upper catwalk with a wrench in one hand and a fuel manifest tucked into his back pocket. Beside him, Connor crouched over an open junction panel, fingers moving through wires with quiet surgical focus. They were identical by face and build, but nobody with functioning eyes ever confused them for long. Caleb leaned toward trouble like it owed him money. Connor looked at disasters the way mathematicians looked at puzzles. Down below, the girl stumbled once, and one of the slavers jerked her upright hard enough to make Caleb's jaw lock. Tell me we're not ignoring this. Connor didn't glance up. Ignoring it was plan A. He clipped a bypass lead into the station tether grid and checked the power flow. Plan A died 3 seconds ago when you made that face. Caleb looked down through the grated rail. The girl lifted her head for one heartbeat and met his eyes. Not begging, not bargaining, just braced for the end. Something ugly and immediate twisted in his chest. Yeah, he said softly. That one. Connor sighed, the sigh of a man who had been related to Caleb for 26 exhausting years. Fine, I'll steal the station. You go be insane. Caleb grinned without humor and headed for the stairs. Love how you say that like we've got separate skill sets. Connor yanked another panel loose. We do. Mine are useful. By the time Caleb dropped into the execution plaza, the whole station had gone half silent. Miners pressed against storefronts. Dock workers stared over crates. An old woman selling protein noodles quietly pulled her cart backward before blaster fire could ruin breakfast. At the center of the plaza stood a black execution dais under hard white lights. The captain beside it wore imperial lacquer armor and the relaxed smile of a man who had never once doubted his own cruelty. The girl stood on her knees now. A slim chain glimmered at her throat where torn fabric exposed a faint pulse of blue light, something hidden beneath her collarbone. Artifact, Caleb guessed. The captain raised a sidearm, and the crowd looked away. Caleb kept walking. He crossed the final meters with the loose swagger of a man who had never once been told no by gravity, destiny, or common sense. Hold that shot, he called. The captain turned, annoyed first, then curious. Good, Caleb thought. Curious was slower than angry. And you are? The captain asked. Caleb stopped close enough for every camera in the plaza to catch his expression. He smiled like he owned reinforcements nobody else could see. Commander Caleb Mercer, he said, Terran Dreadnought Authority. If your trigger finger twitches before I finish this sentence, the antimatter device in my hand turns your ship into education. He lifted his empty fist slightly. The captain stared at it. Around the square, rifle barrels shifted. Connor had once explained that most people saw confidence as evidence. Caleb had turned that into a career. There's nothing in your hand, the captain said. Caleb shrugged. That is exactly what someone holding invisible antimatter would want you to notice. A few miners actually snorted. The captain's jaw tightened. Good again. Humiliation made tyrants sloppy. Caleb took one more step and lowered his voice. Skim my pulse. No spike. No fear. Ask yourself why. Because he did not feel brave, not really. His heart was throwing itself against his ribs like a prisoner at a locked airlock. But nobody here needed that truth except him. On the catwalk above, Connor finished the last splice and whispered into his comm. Tethers are mine. Say the word. Caleb didn't answer. His attention had snagged on the girl. Up close, she looked exhausted to the point of collapse, but there was steel under the terror. She was studying him like she couldn't decide whether he was a savior, an idiot, or both. Fair. Your species has no dreadnought authority here, the captain snapped. You humans haul scrap and sell machine grease. Caleb let out a short laugh. Buddy, my species turned machine grease into 3 moon colonies and a tax dispute. You really want to gamble that we stop there? The crowd shifted again. Even the slavers looked less certain now. Then the girl spoke, voice scraped raw. He lies beautifully. Caleb glanced at her, almost offended. Thank you, he said. I think. Her mouth twitched despite everything. It was small, fast, and devastating. The captain recovered first. Kill them both. Bad choice. Caleb smiled without looking away from Syl. Connor. The station shuddered. Every mooring tether on dock ring 9 snapped loose at once, slamming the slaver ship sideways against the berth with a scream of twisting metal. Lights burst. The execution dais pitched hard enough to throw 2 guards flat. Caleb lunged, drove his shoulder into the captain's chest, and ripped the sidearm free before the man hit the floor. Sarah's rifle thundered from the cargo ramp at the far end of the plaza, punching sparks off armor. Zeke came through the station wall in a stolen loader, cursing at impact. I'm billing all of you for structural trauma. Caleb hauled Syl toward the ramp as alarms shifted to fleet alert. Outside the viewport, signatures dropped from warp. Connor stared at the screen. Caleb, he muttered, you didn't start a rescue. You started war. The hum of hyperspace usually meant absolute safety, but today it just sounded like a ticking countdown. In the rusted galley of their ship, a fist-sized geometric stone sat on the scarred metal table, projecting a holographic map of stars that did not exist in any modern navigation chart. Syl sat across from the ancient relic, her silver clothes stained with dark dockyard grease. She looked incredibly small here, stripped of the immediate threat of execution, but the rigid tension in her narrow shoulders remained completely unbroken. She watched the glowing light with pure reverence and sheer, absolute dread. It is not a simple trinket, Syl said, her voice a low, musical rasp that echoed in the quiet room. It is a genetic cipher, a key meant to unlock the slumbering armada of my forgotten ancestors. Connor adjusted his optical loop, leaning dangerously close to the glowing artifact. Your empire wants to crack it? He asked. They cannot, Syl corrected, her eyes dropping to her trembling hands. The ships respond only to the living bloodline. If I am permanently erased, the biometric locks default to the current throne. They want me legally obsolete so they can inherit many millions. Caleb leaned against the cold bulkhead, arms crossed, watching her instead of the glowing map. He did not care about a million dormant dreadnoughts. He cared about the way her pale hands trembled when she desperately tried to hide them in her lap. He pushed off the wall, stepped to the table, and knelt slightly to catch her evasive gaze. They are not getting you, Caleb stated. Syl looked at him, desperately searching his face for the usual mercenary calculations. She found none. You cannot promise that, Caleb, she whispered. You do not know what actually hunts me right now. I know what is protecting you, Caleb replied softly. The quiet intensity in his rough voice was not a foolish boast. It was a solemn vow. For the first time since her brutal exile began, the cold knot of terror in Syl's chest finally loosened. Before the tender moment could linger, Connor whistled sharply, ruining the silence. Caleb, you might want to temporarily pause the sweeping romantic declarations. He tapped his cracked diagnostic screen. I just ran a deep scan on the artifact's resonance frequencies. It is aggressively pinging my personal bio monitor with a highly encrypted data stream. Caleb frowned, stepping away from the table. Meaning what exactly, Connor? He demanded. Meaning it recognizes human DNA? Connor said, his face paling considerably. The sequence matches our exact neural pathways. That should not be biologically possible unless someone knew our species existed 100,000 years ago. Down in the engineering bay, Zeke slammed a massive hydrospanner against a busted thermal regulator. Sparks showered brilliantly off his chrome shoulder plating. I am a heavy-duty maintenance cyborg, Zeke complained loudly to the completely empty corridor. My core programming consists of engine diagnostics, heavy lifting, and complaining about rust. I am strictly not equipped to properly process ancient galactic mysteries, and my internal sensors are currently overheating from the sheer volume of dramatic romantic tension radiating from the upper deck. It is highly unprofessional. He wrenched another stubborn bolt tight. Next time we adopt a royal fugitive, I demand a mandatory software update that includes advanced couples counseling. Zeke never got to finish his spectacular rant. A deafening synthetic screech suddenly tore through the ship's internal comms. The swirling hyperspace tunnel outside the main viewport abruptly shattered into jagged, blinding lines of normal, terrifying real space stars all around. A massive Imperial tracker probe, entirely cloaked in experimental stealth plating, had unspooled directly above their fragile hull. The devastating EMP burst hit them a microsecond later. Every single light on the rusty vessel died instantly. The artificial gravity completely cut out, sending loose tools, ration packs, and floating debris spinning into the terrifying dark. The deep, comforting thrum of the main engine spun down into a cold, suffocating silence. Red emergency lumens slowly flickered to life, casting bloody shadows across the metal bulkheads. Major hull breach detected. The automated defense system droned methodically. Lower airlock fatally compromised right now. In a cramped armory, Ethan did not wait for official orders. The veteran quartermaster rapidly racked the heavy slide on a massive tungsten slug rifle, the sharp metallic clack echoing violently in a zero-gravity environment. He kicked off the back wall, floating smoothly down the central access shaft directly toward the violently breached deck. "We have heavy boarders." Ethan roared over the static-filled local comms, magnetically locking his heavy boots to the metal floor, grating just as the lower airlock doors violently blew inward. 3 heavily armed Imperial shock troopers spilled directly into the narrow corridor, heavily clad. Ethan ruthlessly squeezed the heavy trigger. The massive rifle roared, instantly punching through the lead trooper's reinforced chest plate and violently sending the alien spinning backward into the freezing void. But dozens more were relentlessly pouring in right behind them, their advanced plasma rifles rapidly lighting up the cramped hallway in blinding, continuous flashes of green death. Caleb abruptly arrived at the upper landing, a customized plasma pistol firmly gripped in each hand. He instantly laid down a violently punishing volley, desperately buying Ethan a precious few seconds to quickly reload his heavy weapon amidst the blinding, chaotic green crossfire. Connor was right behind Caleb, frantically trying to rapidly route auxiliary power to the dormant internal defense turrets, but the massive EMP had completely fried the primary relays. "There are way too many," Ethan shouted loudly, desperately ducking as molten slag violently melted the thick bulkhead mere inches from his head. Syl crouched tightly behind a structural pillar, desperately clutching the glowing artifact to her chest. The Imperial boarding party was advancing ruthlessly. Caleb looked at his terrified, newly formed family. Survival through conventional combat was entirely impossible now, forcing Caleb to make a completely desperate, horrifyingly insane choice today. Metal screamed through the lower decks as the boarding party cut closer to engineering. The emergency lights painted everyone red, turning grease, blood, and fear into the same ugly color. Caleb stood at the reactor console with 2 pistols hanging loose in his hands and watched the pressure gauge climb. Connor was elbow deep in a ripped access panel, rerouting power with the speed of a man trying to outthink death before it learned his name. Ethan knelt behind an overturned coolant drum near the hatch, firing short, brutal bursts whenever an armored shadow crossed the doorway. Syl held the artifact against her ribs, breath shaking, eyes locked on Caleb like he was the last stable thing left in the ship. "We are out of corridor," Ethan snapped. "Next stop is my face." "Then keep your face," Caleb said. Zeke lurched in from the starboard ladder, one metal arm smoking and his chest plating dented inward. "I would also like to keep my face for resale reasons. Sadly, management has failed me." He kicked a power cell across the deck toward Connor. "Found this rolling around near the laundry unit. If we survive, I'm filing a complaint against whoever designed war." Connor caught the cell without looking. Give me 3 minutes. We have maybe 30 seconds, Sarah said over comms from the upper passage. More signatures on the hull. They are cutting through like they paid rent. Caleb looked at the reactor display and made the decision before anybody could talk him out of it. He slapped a safety cover aside and drove his thumb into the manual override. Sirens changed pitch. A new voice rolled through the ship, calm and merciless. Warning. Containment instability. Core overload sequence initiated. Escape pods disabled. Every head in engineering snapped toward him, including Connor's. Connor stared. You disable the pods? Caleb kept his eyes on the door. If they think we can run, they keep pushing. If they think we cannot run? Syl asked. He flashed her a hard, reckless smile. Then they have to decide whether humans are bluffing or clinically insane. The next blast peeled half the hatch inward. Smoke poured through the gap. 4 Imperial shock troops stepped into view with rifles raised. Caleb walked toward them slowly, sidearms lowered, reactor alarms screaming behind him like an audience. The lead trooper barked something in Trey dialect. Caleb answered in clean station cant. Bad day to board, boys. I just armed the engine. The alien hesitated. Good. Hesitation was Connor's oxygen. Caleb lifted one pistol and pointed it casually at the ceiling. Ship is dead, pods are locked, and my brother says the next surge turns this tub into a star-shaped obituary. Humans have a saying. Another trooper edged back. Ethan, behind cover, looked openly confused. Caleb smiled wider. We love a good explosion. That was not remotely true. Caleb liked breathing, coffee, and not becoming plasma confetti. But he delivered the lie like gospel. He even let his pulse slow, shoulders loose, chin steady. The aliens looked past him to the console where red bars climbed toward catastrophe. Then Connor, bless him, slapped a live conduit into place and sent blue arcs spraying across the room. The effect was perfect. One trooper cursed. Another demanded confirmation over comms. Caleb took 2 more easy steps forward and lowered his voice. You can die finishing the breach, he said, or explain to your captain why you left before the humans turned this freighter inside out. Your call. For 3 long beats, nobody moved. Then survival beat pride. The Imperials backed through the ruined hatch, dragging their wounded with them. Ethan exhaled so hard it sounded like a prayer. Sarah's voice burst in over comms. They're pulling off the clamps. Connor, Caleb said, finally turning, please tell me your miracle has wheels. Connor yanked free from the panel, face smeared with grease and triumph. Not wheels. A blind micro jump through unstable mass shadow. So, objectively worse. They ran. Engineering became motion and noise. Ethan shoved fresh magazines into Caleb's belt as they sprinted. Zeke locked the blast doors behind them with his remaining hand and muttered, Wonderful. I finally achieved peak combat elegance and immediately become asymmetrical. You are beautiful either way, Sarah said as she met them at the junction. I reject pity compliments on medical grounds. Chloe waited in the cockpit, fingers white on the scanner rail. She was the youngest on the crew and trying very hard not to sound it. More ships dropping in. If we stay here, we become a cautionary poster. Connor slid into navigation and slapped together 3 damaged systems that had never been introduced properly, let alone asked to cooperate. The engines coughed, screamed, then caught. Outside the viewport, the tracker probe swung around for another disabling shot. Caleb dropped into the co-pilot's seat. Punch it before they remember math. Connor bared his teeth. That is exactly my plan. Space folded wrong. The ship ripped sideways through a tunnel of fractures and impossible echoes, every bolt in the hull screaming like it wanted out. Syl hit the deck, still clutching the artifact, as frost raced across the windows and gravity switched directions twice. Then the world ended in impact. Metal shrieked. Glass burst. Caleb threw one arm across her before the console tore loose and slammed him into the bulkhead. When silence finally stumbled in, it came with cold so savage it bit through smoke. The jump had buried them nose first in blue ice under a sky. Zeke stared at the sparking stump where his mechanical arm used to be and sighed. Well, that is going to hurt my dating prospects. Caleb tried to stand and folded, blood soaking his jacket. Syl dropped beside him, pressed the artifact to his chest, and watched silver light pour through his wounds. Outside, Sarah and Chloe climbed the wreck and froze at the horizon, where colossal metal shapes slept beneath the ice. Sunlight vanished behind metal. From the command deck, Earth looked like a bright blue heartbeat trapped under a closing fist as the main Imperial armada translated into the Sol system in layered waves. Carriers the size of mountain ranges, siege cruisers and disciplined rings, escort screens so dense they turned near orbit into a wall of moving steel. And at the center of it all, gliding forward with obscene certainty, came the super laser platform. Nobody said anything for a moment. They just stared as the weapon unfolded. Segment by segment, the massive cannon assembly rotated around a dark central spine, coolant ribs extending like the bones of some ancient predator. It was too large to feel like a ship. It looked like a verdict. On the tactical display, projected firing arcs spread across Earth's atmosphere in red cones of probable death. Sarah broke the silence first. Tell me that thing is slower than it looks. Connor scanned the fresh wave of data flooding in. Bad news. It is faster than my anxiety. That is medically unhelpful, Maya muttered from the med station. Caleb stood beside the command rail, jaw locked, watching the enemy formation tighten around the weapon. Their window had become microscopic. Every conventional option led to the same ending. Too many ships, too much shielding, not enough time. The dreadnought could gut one cruiser, maybe two, before the super laser fired and turned entire cities into memory. Syl stepped to the central relic interface, her face pale in the projection light. The flagship is feeding command synchronization to the whole armada, she said. If they keep a clean network, they'll hold formation no matter how hard Earth fights. Connor looked at Caleb. Caleb looked back. That was the whole conversation. Then both twins moved. What are you doing? Sarah asked as Connor dropped into the system's pit and started ripping open old communication layers in the dreadnought's core software. Something irresponsible, Connor said. Caleb leaned over his shoulder, already scanning enemy command linguistics, crew doctrine flags, and panic thresholds from the Karth Vale files. Not irresponsible. Educational. Chloe looked between them. That means bluff, doesn't it? It means, Caleb said, we stop trying to beat their weapons and start beating their certainty. The idea was insane, which helped. Connor fed the dreadnought's ancient broadcasting lattice through Imperial military encryption stolen from half a dozen previous engagements. Then he began building a message not for admirals, but for everyone under them. Pilots, gunnery crews, damage control teams, lower deck soldiers who never got the full truth and had spent their whole careers being taught to fear contamination, mutation, and unknown biowarfare. Caleb shaped the lie. Not a threat. Not exactly. A warning. He paced behind Connor as words and symbols stacked across the screens. Make Earth sound less like a planet and more like a SEAL mistake, he said. Ancient quarantine protocols. Irreversible contamination. Neural infection vectors. Something that makes touching the atmosphere feel like volunteering to rot from the inside. Connor's fingers flew. You know, most people here save the homeworld and think missiles. Missiles are honest. We're busy. Zeke rolled onto the bridge with his cannon mounted, one optic already linked to the translation feed. Please tell me I'm finally being asked to weaponize my naturally soothing voice. Caleb pointed at the screen. I need this in every Imperial dialect we've got. And I need it terrifying. Zeke read the draft once and gave an appreciative hum. Oh, this is evil. Very tasteful. You want bureaucratic dread or apocalyptic dread? Both, Syl said quietly. He snapped his fingers. My time has come. The dreadnought's comm lattice opened like a cathedral organ. Across the battlefield, every unsecured Imperial display screen flickered. Then every semi-secured one. Then, with ancient systems muscle and Connor's malicious genius behind it, even flagship auxiliary panels began to glitch. Helm displays died. Weapon overlays stuttered. Mess hall screens froze. Tactical projectors cut to black. And on every surface, From bridge consoles to maintenance tablets, the same symbol appeared. Biological containment mandate. Below, it rolled lines of screaming red script, translated into every fleet dialect Zeke could force through the channel. Unauthorized entry into Terran biosphere constitutes self-terminating exposure. Cross-species cognitive cascade event in progress. Quarantine was established for a reason. Then Zeke added the spoken layer. His voice boomed through the hijacked channels, smooth, grim, and just sarcastic enough to feel real. Attention Imperial personnel. Congratulations on reaching the contaminated zone. By remaining in proximity to Earth, you may already be sharing thoughts with the local apex pathogens. Symptoms include paranoia, spontaneous empathy, and terminal decision-making errors. Please report any affection from mammals to your supervisor. On the bridge, Chloe actually choked on a laugh. Even Sarah cracked a smile. That's horrible. Thank you, Zeke said. The effect on the armada was immediate. Connor watched their network telemetry fracture in real time. Lower-ranking ships started demanding clarification from command. Internal channels overloaded. 2 escort screens veered out of alignment as crews argued over contamination procedures. A destroyer killed its own docking tubes and backed away from a resupply ship broadcasting false exposure alarms. Another cruiser sealed half its decks after a medic interpreted the warning literally and flagged everyone with elevated heart rates as infected. Caleb leaned over the tactical display, eyes bright with the savage hope of a liar whose audience was panicking exactly on schedule. Push the second phase. Connor grinned and flooded the fleet with fabricated sensor ghosts. Fake atmospheric spores blooming toward capital ships. False contamination spikes on boarding craft. Forged medical reports from invented officers begging for isolation before the human condition spread. Zeke layered in one last translated line, dry as vacuum. Do not establish eye contact with the planet. Imperial discipline finally began to snap. The Armada's perfect formation loosened into messy, human-like hesitation. Not enough to win outright. Enough to open a path. Sarah saw it first on her hellmarks. There, cooling spine on the super laser. They just exposed the vent corridor. She didn't wait for permission. The dreadnought lunged forward, plunging through the widening seam in the disrupted fleet while Earth's defenses hammered at the confused outer screen. Beams flashed past the hull. Missiles burned under them. Wreckage turned in slow fire behind the ship. It felt less like flying and more like threading a needle at the speed of vengeance. Syl pressed both hands into the command seal. Silver authority codes raced from her bloodline through the old systems and punched into the enemy flagship's automated defense net. For one precious stretch of seconds, hostile turrets along the super laser perimeter blinked blind. I can hold this, she said through clenched teeth. Not long. Caleb strapped into the assault rail and looked at Connor. His twin already knew. No more bluffs. Now, they had to fly straight into the mouth of the thing. The dreadnought hit the super laser like a meteor with a grudge. Ancient armor screamed against Imperial plating as Sarah drove the massive ship straight through the cooling spine corridor, shaving sparks and molten metal across every viewport. The entire hull shuddered so hard that crew straps snapped loose and warning glyphs burst red across the bridge. Outside, the black lattice of the superweapon rushed past in a blur of steel, fire, and collapsing geometry. Every second they stayed inside that structure, the enemy guns tightened around them. Sarah kept both hands locked on the helm and bared her teeth. I would like everyone to know this was an awful plan. From the core station, Connor didn't look up. That means it was ours. Another impact hammered through the ship. Overhead conduits burst. White steam blasted across the deck. Maya caught Chloe before she was thrown against the comms rail, while Ethan sealed the bridge hatch and threw fresh power into the internal bulkheads. Caleb was already at the assault lock with Syl beside him. He checked the charge pack on his rifle, then looked at her. The light from the artifact at her throat painted silver across her jaw and the edge of her collar. In any sane universe, this would have been the wrong moment to notice how much he loved her. In this one, it felt necessary. "You still want to do this?" he asked. Sil drew a steady breath and met his eyes. "I wanted a different life. This is the one I have." He gave the smallest nod. "Then we finish it." The boarding tube fired with a brutal metallic punch, locking them onto the Imperial flagship that rode above the super laser spine like a throne nailed to a gun. The hatch blew inward. Caleb, Sil, and Zeke stormed through smoke into a corridor lined with polished black walls and terrified guards who had expected fear, not humans. They got violence instead. Caleb dropped the first 2 soldiers before their rifles cleared. Sil slipped left, blade flashing in short bright arcs that turned close-quarters panic into clean openings. She no longer moved like prey. She moved like somebody reclaiming stolen ground, one step at a time. Behind them, Zeke planted his magnetic boots, swung the oversized plasma cannon into line, and lit the corridor blue. Bolts slammed through enemy cover, vaporizing a barricade and 3 troopers with it. "This," Zeke announced over the roar, "is still not enough compensation for my skill set." "File your complaint later," Caleb shouted. "I already have." With Destiny back on the dreadnought, Connor stood inside a forest of open panels, cables hanging around him like metallic vines. The ancient core was alive now, humming with catastrophic potential. He had one job: make the dreadnought's death and the super laser's firing sequence happen in the exact same breath. Too early, and the weapon survived. Too late, and Earth died with them watching. Jackson slid beside him, face pale from reflected warning lights. "Tell me we have margin." Connor laughed once, sharp and humorless. "We have faith, electrical tape, and what I would generously call timing. You always were the optimistic twin." "No, Caleb's the optimist. I'm just mean to impossible things until they behave." On the flagship, the inner resistance thickened. Blast doors crashed down ahead of the boarding team. Reinforcements flooded the upper halls. Imperial officers barked commands and clipped panic while bridge security locked the central shaft. Caleb slammed a magnetic charge onto the sealed door and shoved Sil back around the corner just before the explosion tore inward. The command bridge waited beyond, vast and cold, and raised above the battlefield like a shrine to control. Tactical displays hung in midair. Weapon channels streamed toward the super laser core. And at the center of the chamber stood the Supreme Commander. He was taller than Caleb expected, draped in ceremonial armor too ornate to hide the brutality of the man wearing it. Half his face was scar tissue and polished implants. The other half carried the smug calm of somebody who had spent a lifetime confusing power with destiny. His gaze landed on Sil first. "So," he said softly, "the lost bloodline comes home in human hands." Caleb stepped in front of her. "Funny, we were about to say the same thing about your ship." The commander's mouth twisted. "You cannot stop this." "No," Caleb said, "but I can absolutely ruin your day." The commander moved first. He crossed the distance with terrifying speed, smashing Caleb sideways with a kinetic strike from his gauntlet that hit like a vehicle collision. Caleb slammed into a railing hard enough to see white. His rifle spun away across the deck. Sil went for the artifact, but the commander turned on her instantly, driving her back with vicious precision. Caleb forced himself upright through the pain and launched back in. The fight got ugly fast. No elegant choreography. No heroic balance. Just steel fists, impact, breath, blood. Caleb took hits he should not have survived because every time the commander shifted towards Sil, something primitive and unbreakable in him refused to let it happen. He blocked with his forearms, rammed shoulders, fought low, fought dirty, bought seconds one bruise at a time. The commander was stronger. Caleb was human, which in moments like this meant unreasonable. Across the deck, Sil knelt beside a shattered relay pedestal and pulled the artifact free from her throat clasp. It opened in her hands like a living star, projecting old authority patterns into the bridge systems. She understood the truth all at once. The commander had not inherited the fleet. He had stolen enough ceremonial access to pretend. "Connor," she whispered into comms, "he's counterfeit. The throne codes are layered. I can strip him." Connor's voice came through static and fire. Then do it now, because I'm rapidly approaching a very unhealthy idea. Syl rose and lifted the artifact toward the bridge core. Light flooded the chamber in silver-white waves. Ancient command symbols erupted across the displays, scanning the commander's biometrics, titles, blood seals, and legal claims. For one long, awful second, nothing happened. Then the system judged him. Red. Every command thread around the bridge snapped dark. Targeting channels died. Fleet synchronization collapsed. The Supreme Commander froze in place as the artifact ripped false authority out of him like hooks from flesh. His expression changed for the first time. Not rage. Fear. On the dreadnought, Connor shoved both hands into the final interface and felt the core wake beneath him like a star about to break. Alarm screamed. Jackson backed toward the evac line. Somewhere above, Sarah was still holding the ship inside the superlaser skeleton by sheer stubbornness and bad physics. Connor looked at the countdown, then at Earth on the side monitor, then at the narrow, blinking alignment window between the dreadnought's overload pulse and the superlaser's ignition cycle. He swallowed and hit execute. The countdown voice followed them through every corridor. Core breach in 90 seconds. Core breach in 89 seconds. It echoed through the flagship and the dying dreadnought in the same flat tone, as if the universe had suddenly decided to narrate their funeral with perfect manners. Caleb yanked Syl up from the bridge deck as dead command screens rained sparks around them, and somewhere behind the smoke the Supreme Commander was still frozen in the ruins of his stolen authority. There was no time to finish him. Time had become more expensive than vengeance. "Moo!" Caleb shouted. Zeke was already backing toward the breach corridor, cannon hot and glowing. "I am moving with all the elegance available to a heavily armed miracle." On the dreadnought, Connor ripped free from the final interface with blood running from one nostril and static dancing across his sleeves. Jackson grabbed his arm and practically dragged him toward the emergency transfer ring. The whole ship had started to vibrate at a frequency no structure was ever meant to survive. Bulkheads cracked. Light fixtures burst. Ancient systems, awake after centuries of silence, were now dying loud enough to shake orbit. Sarah's voice slammed over comms. "Everybody to the teleport anchor now. I cannot hold this line another minute." "You got 30 seconds, Maya snapped from the medical deck. "I don't have 30 seconds. I have attitude." That sounded like Sarah, which somehow made it worse. Caleb, Syl, and Zeke burst through the flagship's lower transit corridor under a rain of debris. Imperial crew were scattering now, no longer soldiers, just terrified bodies trying to outrun physics. One officer tried to raise a pistol. Syl struck his wrist aside with the artifact still blazing in her hand, and Caleb shoulder-checked him into a collapsing wall panel without breaking stride. "Remind me," Syl breathed, "why every plan with humans ends with falling metal." "Variety," Caleb said. The transfer ring on the dreadnought flared alive, just as the surviving team crashed into it from 3 directions at once. Connor stumbled in first with Jackson and Chloe, Ethan right behind them, one arm scorched and rifle half melted. Maya shoved Sarah into the circle a heartbeat later after the pilot sprinted off the bridge with her harness still hanging loose behind her. Zeke arrived last from the external service shaft, smoke pouring from his cannon mount and one shoulder plate missing entirely. Caleb and Syl hit the ring just as the deck beneath them split. For one impossible second, everyone hung in a storm of white light, alarms, and raw force. Caleb felt Syl's hand lock around his. Connor caught his eye across the circle. No words passed. None were needed. Twin to twin, they both knew exactly what they had done. Then the teleport fired. They landed hard in wet grass under open sky. The impact knocked the breath out of Caleb and filled his mouth with the taste of iron and dirt. For a moment, he did not understand why the air smelled alive. Then Earth rushed in all at once. Rain-soaked soil, engine smoke, distant ocean salt, the green bite of crushed weeds under his palms. Real wind moved across his skin. Gravity felt softer here. War still screamed overhead, but beneath it was something steadier, older home. They had materialized on a hillside outside a battered evacuation zone, maybe 20 miles from the near city. Emergency sirens wailed faintly in the distance. Anti-orbital batteries flashed on the horizon. Above them, the night sky had turned into a cathedral of fire. The dreadnought died first. It happened high above the atmosphere, deep inside the guts of the super laser, where Connor's timing and human stubbornness met ancient overkill. A star-white bloom punched outward from the superweapon center, splitting armor rings and shattering the captured flagship into flaming ribs. For one blinding instant, the whole sky became daylight. Then the shockwave rolled. Cloud banks lit gold. Orbit filled with expanding debris and molten fragments. The superlaser's broken spine spun apart in 12 burning sections, each one trailing sheets of plasma as it tumbled toward vacuum. Nearby Imperial warships caught the edge of the blast and folded like toys. Others simply lost formation, drives flaring wild as captains chose survival over orders and turned away from Earth in terrified retreat. Sarah pushed herself up to one knee and stared upward, rain streaking soot down her face. Holy hell. Connor laughed once, half delirious, half shattered. That, he said hoarsely, was mathematically beautiful. Your math nearly killed us, Maya said. Only nearly. That's growth. Across the hillside, scattered human soldiers and evac crews had stopped what they were doing to look up. Some cheered. Some cried. Some just stood frozen under the impossible light show of a dead armada burning itself out over their planet. The war above them was not fully finished, but the shape of it had changed. The Empire had come to terrify Earth. Now its survivors were running from it. Zeke rose with a groan of servos and looked at the humid night air like it had personally offended him. I would like the record to show that Earth's atmosphere is sticky, sentimental, and offensively full of insects. A moth drifted straight into his faceplate. He recoiled. And the wildlife has no respect for rank. Chloe actually laughed, exhausted and bright and disbelieving. Ethan sank down onto an overturned supply crate and covered his eyes with one hand, not from pain, but from the weight of finally being alive long enough to feel tired. Jackson stood beside him, both men watching the sky with the stunned posture of mechanics who had somehow brute-forced destiny. Caleb found Syl a few steps away from the others. She stood in the wet grass with ash on her cheek and silver light fading slowly from the artifact in her hands. Above her, burning wreckage crossed the stars like falling kingdoms. Her expression was not triumph. It was wonder, grief, relief, and something even more fragile than all of them put together. "This is your world," she whispered. Caleb came up beside her. "Looks better when people aren't trying to vaporize it." She let out a breath that almost became a laugh. Then she rested her head against his shoulder, carefully at first, as if still learning she was allowed to lean on someone. He wrapped one arm around her and held her there while the sky burned itself clean. For a while, nobody spoke. Connor eventually limped over and stopped at Caleb's other side. The twins looked up together at the glowing scars in orbit. Once, they had been cargo engineers arguing over fuel lines and broken relays. Now their decisions had rearranged the night above Earth. Connor rubbed blood from his lip. "You know, Mom would say this is why nobody should leave us unsupervised." Caleb smiled, tired down to the bone. She'd be right. Above them, the last clusters of Imperial ships broke formation and fled into deep black space, leaving trails of blue jump fire behind. Earth had survived. The family had survived. For the first time in years, the future felt possible. Then Syl's artifact pulsed once in her hands. Not fading, answering. Peace on Earth arrived loudly, then awkwardly, then not at all. The first week was sirens, headlines, emergency sessions, cheering crowds, and enough cameras to make Caleb consider starting a second war, just to escape them. Cities lit up with victory projections. Pilots painted kill marks on patched hulls. Children wore paper dreadnoughts on their heads and asked impossible questions about alien queens, space battles, and whether cyborgs were allowed to own dogs. Humanity celebrated the way it always did after surviving something terrible, with music, arguments, bad planning, and too much food. But even at the center of the noise, the crew never fully unclenched. They had seen too much of the Empire's reach to mistake one victory for safety. Destroying the Armada had broken its teeth, not its hunger. Somewhere beyond mapped lanes, surviving governors, admirals, and opportunists were already dividing the wreckage and deciding what came next. Earth had won a battle bright enough to make history books sweat. The war itself had only changed shape. That was why Caleb loved the wedding. It was small on purpose. No stadium, no state spectacle, no military parade wrapped in romance. Just a green hillside above the coast, wind moving through tall grass, a hand-built arch of salvaged alloy and white flowers, and the family gathered close enough to hear each other breathe. The ocean below caught the late afternoon sun in sheets of gold. For once, nobody needed armor. Syl wore silver, so simple it made her look even more regal. Caleb wore a dark jacket that fit badly because he kept forgetting to stand still during tailoring. Connor stood beside him with the expression of a man performing best brother duty under protest and deep emotion. Sarah and Maya handled nearly everything else because if left alone, the twins would have tried to organize a wedding using cargo straps and improvised confidence. "You look nervous," Connor murmured. "I am nervous." You jumped onto an execution platform, rammed a superweapon, and insulted a fleet commander to his face. "Yeah," Caleb said, watching Syl step into the wind, "but she's scarier." Connor snorted. "Fair." The vows were quiet. That was what made them hit harder. No grand speech about destiny. No polished political script. Caleb promised to stay, even when fear told him to run toward danger instead of home. Syl promised that whatever bloodline history had tried to make of her, she would choose this life freely and again. When they reached for each other's hands, both of them were shaking just enough to be real. The family stood around them with tears, tired smiles, and the kind of protective love built only through surviving the impossible together. When it was done, the wind carried applause over the grass. Then came the silence after the private kind. Caleb and Syl slipped away to the edge of the hill while the others handled food, glasses, and the inevitable debate over whether earthcake was superior to station rations. Syl leaned into him, wedding band bright against her fingers, and looked out at the ocean. "I never thought I would belong anywhere," she admitted. Caleb kissed her temple. "Good thing you married into a family that overcommits." Below the hill, Zeke's repair shop had already become a local legend. He had taken over an old aircraft hangar outside the city and renamed it Zeke's Precision Mechanical Disappointment. Human vehicles lined the lot in various states of humiliation. Motorcycles, trucks, agricultural bots. One small shuttle whose owner had made the mistake of asking for a discount. Zeke moved between them with a plasma torch in one hand and permanent judgment in his voice. A teenager approached him carefully beside a broken electric bike. "Can you fix it?" Zeke looked at the exposed wiring and sighed through a speaker grill. "Can I?" "Yes." "Should I have to?" "No." This machine appears to have been assembled by committee and then abandoned by ethics. The teen blinked. "So that's a yes?" "It is a condemnation with labor attached." Business thrived. Meanwhile, Sarah and Maya had become nightmares for a new generation of pilot trainees. In a desert test range lined with captured Imperial components and human-built prototypes, they taught recruits how to think past doctrine, adapt under pressure, and never trust an enemy to behave rationally just because the manual said so. Sarah drilled evasive patterns until people saw them in their sleep. Maya ran survival triage simulations that made seasoned officers sweat through their collars. Again, Sarah barked as a rookie clipped the edge of a target loop in a simulator pod. The trainee groaned. "I'm trying. Try less politely." Across the field, Chloe helped integrate alien sensor logic into Earth command software, while Ethan oversaw weapons handling and quietly terrified anyone careless enough to treat war like a game. Jackson worked orbital salvage, piecing together the future from wreckage. Little by little, humanity stopped merely surviving contact with the stars and began learning how to meet them standing up. Connor, naturally, vanished into data. The remaining fragments of Syl's artifact had survived the battle, though changed. The original hull was gone, burned through use, bloodline access, and whatever ancient failsafes had awakened during the war. But the fragments still pulsed with buried patterns, and Connor loved buried patterns more than most people loved sleep. For weeks he lived in a workshop full of projection dust, handwritten equations, coffee rings, and interface rigs held together by genius and disrespect. He fed the fragments through translated archive logic, human neural harmonics, and one frankly irresponsible reconstruction engine Chloe helped refine. Most nights Caleb found him awake at 2 in the morning talking to alien geometry like it had personally insulted him. One night, after the wedding guests had gone and the coast had turned black under moonlight, Connor called Caleb and Syl into the lab without preamble. On the table between them, the artifact fragments floated in a tight ring of pale light. Symbols turned slowly in the air, no longer random, no longer broken. A map had emerged from the noise. Caleb frowned. That's new. Connor nodded, eyes fixed on the projection. I finally stopped asking what the fragments were and started asking what they were hiding. Syl stepped closer, her face lit silver. Coordinates? Yes, Connor said, but not to a fleet, not to a weapon either. He swallowed once, and that alone made Caleb's pulse rise. Connor rarely sounded rattled by answers. These point to the origin vault of your bloodline. The first court, the place before the Empire. Outside the lab window, stars hung over Earth in clean, innocent silence. Inside, the map shifted. Then another set of coordinates began writing itself beneath the first, older and far beyond known space. The first warning did not come from a telescope. It came from Connor's lab at 3:13 in the morning, when every fragment of the artifact lifted off the steel table at once and began rotating in complete silence. The room filled with white light, so bright it turned every shadow razor sharp. Connor stumbled back, nearly taking a monitor with him, while equations, bloodline glyphs, and impossible star maps exploded across the air in layered circles. Caleb hit the doorway first. Talk to me. Connor didn't look away from the hovering fragments. I would love to, but apparently ancient alien nonsense has selected violence again. The whole base shook. Not from impact, from alarms. Every warning siren in the complex surged to life in overlapping waves. Red strobes flashed through the hall. Chloe's voice broke over the internal calm, far too calm to be comforting. Unknown mass just appeared beyond the heliopause. Appeared. No jump flare. No approach vector. It's just there. Syl entered behind Caleb and stopped cold when she saw the projection. The light recognized her immediately. Threads of silver uncoiled from the fragments and wrapped around her wrists without touching skin. Symbols folded open, rearranged, and then a new image formed above the table. Not a map, a message. An immense structure hung in the stars, blacker than the void around it, built from interlocking rings and vertical spines that seemed to bend perspective around their edges. It was too symmetrical to be natural and too large to feel like a ship. Whole moons could have hidden inside its frame. Around it drifted shattered worlds, broken into neat geometric pieces. Connor swallowed hard. That's not a station. No, Syl whispered. It's a gate engine. Caleb turned. At what? Her face had gone bloodless. My bloodline was never meant to inherit an empire. We were made to seal something, to identify it, to stop it from opening fully. She looked at the ancient message as if a buried truth had just reached up from a grave and grabbed her by the throat. We were not rulers. We were locks. The hologram pulsed, and this time it spoke. The voice was not language at first. It was pressure, memory, harmonic code forcing itself into translation through the artifact, and anything human enough nearby to suffer through it. Then words emerged, fractured but clear. Containment failing. Custodian line degraded. Return to origin threshold immediately. Maya stepped into the lab with a med kit still slung over one shoulder. Please tell me that does not mean what it sounds like. It means, Connor said, something older than the Empire is waking up, and the people who built Syl's bloodline expected this exact day. The emergency command center went from sleep cycle quiet to wartime motion in minutes. Screens filled with deep-range scans, power readings, and model projections that all agreed on one horrifying point. The structure beyond the edge of the solar system was active, growing brighter, and emitting gravitational behavior that made physics look negotiable. Earth fleets were mobilizing. Orbital stations were evacuating civilian sectors. Nothing in the defense grid had a firing solution it trusted. Sarah stood over the tactical table with one hand braced against the edge. Could it be hostile? Connor gave her a look. It materialized beside our star like a threat written in architecture. Fair. Ethan checked rifle packs with the steady patience of a man who had long ago accepted that peace was just a pause between ammunition orders. Jackson coordinated launch crews on 3 channels at once. Chloe rerouted satellite eyes toward the outer system and kept cursing softly every time the readings updated. The numbers never improved. Zeke arrived, carrying his detached plasma cannon under one arm, like a disapproving parent carrying a misbehaving child. I had plans, he said. They involved coffee, minor vehicle repair, and not confronting cosmic extinction before sunrise. Caleb took up his worn rifle from the armory rack and locked the magazine in with a hard metallic click. Across the room, Connor sealed a portable interface rig to his forearm and loaded translated artifact data into his field systems. The twins looked at each other over the scattered equipment, old understanding moving between them faster than speech. Connor broke first. We are aware this is absurd, right? Caleb slung the rifle over his shoulder. Deeply. We may die horribly. Probably. Connor nodded once. Okay, just checking family policy. Syl stepped into the armory doorway, wearing dark combat gear threaded with silver command filaments. Her wedding band caught the fluorescent light for the briefest second. She looked afraid. She also looked unmovable. I go, she said before anyone could object. Caleb opened his mouth anyway. She cut him off with a single glance. If my bloodline is the key, then hiding me on Earth is not protection. It is surrender. He hated that she was right. He loved her for being the kind of right that stood upright under pressure. Then we go together. On the tarmac, the new dreadnought waited under floodlights and rising dawn. Human-built at the core. Alien-shaped, where reverse-engineered systems had taught Earth's engineers how to stop thinking small. The hull ran dark and sleek, armored with layered plates salvaged from Imperial wreckage and enhanced by ancient design logic Connor still called rude. Rail batteries lined the spine. New shield veins glowed faint blue beneath the skin. On the prow, someone had painted a simple name in white block letters. Harbinger. Sarah climbed the boarding ramp first, running one hand along the hull like greeting a dangerous horse. Now this feels illegal. Maya snorted behind her. That's how I know you like it. Chloe hauled a sensor case aboard. Jackson followed with power couplings. Ethan checked the troop bay twice, and then a third time because war rewarded paranoia. Zeke reattached the plasma cannon to his shoulder mount with a loud magnetic clunk and looked offended by the sunrise. My retirement, he announced to absolutely everyone, lasted 11 months, 2 weeks, and one very disappointing fishing trip. You hate fishing, Chloe said. I hate being interrupted while hating fishing. Connor paused at the foot of the ramp and looked back once toward the waking base, the distant cities beyond it, and the blue curve of Earth under morning cloud. Home had become real enough to hurt leaving. Caleb came up beside him. For a moment the twins said nothing. Then Caleb bumped his shoulder. You ready? Connor exhaled. No. Good. Means you're thinking. They boarded together. Inside the command deck, Syl placed the artifact fragments into the new core cradle. The ship answered instantly. Lights rippled awake. Systems aligned. Somewhere far beyond Pluto, the impossible structure brightened as if it had felt them choose. Sarah dropped into the helm. Course. Connor fed the coordinates in, hand steady now. Straight into the bad idea. The engines rose. The crew strapped in. And humanity's most stubborn family launched toward the dark, ready to bluff the end of the universe to its face. They buried Wyatt in a chamber built for emperors and gave him a worker's goodbye. No anthem, no polished speech. Just the crew standing in a circle beneath the ancient dreadnoughts' dim silver lights, while Maya placed his name on a strip of whole metal cut from the section he had saved. Frost smoked faintly from the walls. Sarah stared at the floor with both hands clenched behind her back. Ethan stood like a man, trying not to become a statue. Chloe cried openly and seemed offended by it. Zeke, for once, said nothing at all. Caleb stepped forward last. He rested 2 fingers on the metal marker and swallowed hard. He bought us time, he said, so we don't waste it. That was all. It was enough. Afterward, they ate together in the galley because grief hit harder in silence. Nobody had much appetite. Connor sat with a data slate open beside a cooling ration tray, already dissecting the Imperial telemetry they had ripped from the fleeing fleet. Syl sat shoulder to shoulder with Caleb, not speaking, just close. That closeness had become its own language. Every now and then her hand touched the back of his wrist, small and quiet, like a reminder that he was still here. Connor finally looked up. The surviving ships sent a priority burst before they jumped. Sarah lifted her eyes. To who? Everybody important. He turned the screen so they could all see it. Fragments of military routing, production schedules, weapons transfers, and one repeated designation threaded through all of it. Project Cindervale. Jackson let out a low whistle. That sounds healthy. It's a super weapon, Connor said. Planetary scale. The design notes are fragmented, but the power draw is obscene. Syl's face lost color. They rebuilt it. Caleb turned to her. You know this. Not this version. Her voice came tight. My father's court used the name for a prototype. A beam platform meant to break rebellious worlds so thoroughly that survivors would obey before the second shot. The room went very still. Zeke stabbed at his ration brick with a fork like he wanted to harm the concept of empire itself. Excellent. We are now hiding from a government that can vaporize planets and still somehow decorate everything like a tax office. Connor tapped the slate again. There's a supply nexus in the Karth Vale trade ring. Half shipyard, half criminal bazaar. If Cindervale is moving from prototype to deployment, that station will know where. Sarah leaned back. So we sneak in. Ethan gave her a flat look. When you say sneak, do you mean our usual version with explosions? Only if morale requires it. By the next cycle, the dreadnought had folded itself beneath a veil of ancient stealth and drifted ghost-like into the outer lanes of Karth Vale. The station looked less built than accumulated. Towers welded onto towers, cargo discs spinning through smoggy dock lights, neon trade glyphs flickering over rusted armor plates, and traffic so dense it looked like a machine trying to digest itself. Every crime in the sector apparently rented office space there. Their disguises were insultingly effective. Caleb wore scarred mercenary armor with no insignia and enough visible weapons to advertise bad manners. Connor posed as a contract systems broker, hair slicked back, expression permanently unimpressed. Syl hid her markings beneath dark fabric and a throat clasp, though no disguise could fully erase the regal precision in the way she moved. Ethan became hired muscle. Sarah handled ship contracts and docking fraud. Zeke suffered most. They had fitted him with a service droid shell. The rounded white casing clicked over his combat frame like an act of personal disrespect. As he rolled down the ramp muttering to himself, Chloe nearly laughed. You look helpful. I look washable, Zeke said bitterly. If anyone asks me for beverage service, I am declaring mutiny. Inside Karth Vale, the air smelled like ozone, spice smoke, coolant leaks, and too many species lying at once. Traders shouted from hanging platforms. Smugglers whispered over data chips. Enforcers watched from balcony rails with the bored expression of people hoping somebody made a mistake worth charging for. Caleb and Syl moved through the main exchange halls as if they had done this together for years. You keep drifting closer when you're nervous, Caleb murmured without looking at her. I'm not nervous. You're close enough to steal my heat. That is because you insist on walking into danger like it personally invited you. He smiled faintly. There she is. Their first lead came from a shipbreaker with artificial gills and expensive fear. Their second came from an Imperial procurement clerk who drank too much and bragged too loudly. By the time station night rolled across the central ring, they had a name, a dock number, and a timetable. Cinder Vale's focusing arrays were being assembled in secret above the dead side of a red giant. Earth was not yet on the official target roster, but it was listed in strategic projections under potential human escalation zones. That phrase sat in Caleb's chest like shrapnel. Meanwhile, Connor slid into the station mainframe through a maintenance corridor and spoke fluent machine better than most diplomats spoke lies. He seeded relay loops, copied ship manifests, and built hidden access doors inside the security lattice while humming under his breath. Jackson covered him at the junction. Over comms, Connor sounded almost pleased. "I'm in." Sarah's voice came low. "How deep?" "So deep, I may owe the architecture an apology." Then everything went wrong in a tavern called the Ben Halo. It started with a stare. A local warlord sat in the upper alcove, surrounded by hired killers, jeweled fingers drumming on a rail of carved bone. He had one gold eye, one biological one, and the kind of smile that thought ownership was a personality trait. Caleb noticed him at the same moment Syl did. Too late. The warlord rose slowly. "Well," he said across the room, voice carrying through smoke and music, "either grief has made me visionary, or the lost bloodline just walked into my district wearing cheap cloth." Every conversation in the tavern died. Syl's spine went rigid. One guard moved for his weapon. Caleb moved first. He hurled a drinking glass into the guard's throat and drove his shoulder into the nearest table, flipping it into two more men. Connor came through the side crowd like a blade with paperwork issues, smashing a stool across someone's jaw before the body even finished standing. The twins fell into that impossible rhythm again. Not identical, just devastatingly complementary. Caleb broke structure. Connor broke timing. One forced panic, the other punished it. Ethan planted himself at the entrance and opened up with controlled suppressive bursts, driving mercenaries back behind shattered pillars and screaming patrons. Sarah vaulted the bar, kicked a rifle from one thug's grip, and fired point-blank into a ceiling cable, showering sparks across the center floor. Zeke, still trapped in his humiliating service shell, rammed a charging enforcer hard enough to dent both of them. "I was built for vengeance," he shouted. "Not hospitality." More boots thundered in the hall outside. Station security. Reinforcements. Too many. Caleb grabbed Syl's hand. Connor snatched the stolen data core from under a dead smuggler's chair, and all of them ran for the dock lifts as lockdown sirens began to howl across Carthvale. The dreadnought shook so hard on re-entry that frost burst from the inner seams like breath from a dying beast. Ancient engines screamed beneath the deck plating, pushing far past anything Connor claimed was survivable, which meant they were probably only slightly past it. Outside the forward glass, hyperspace peeled away in jagged bands of blue static, and the stars of home came into view. Then Sol lit up with weapons fire. Nobody on the bridge spoke for half a second. Earth floated ahead, blue and white and heartbreakingly fragile, wrapped in a thin ring of orbital platforms that looked painfully small against the dark mass of the invading fleet. Imperial Vanguard ships were already pouring through high orbit and disciplined attack lines, their weapons hammering defensive stations that had never been built for this kind of war. Sarah leaned forward in the helm cradle. "We're late." "Not dead yet," Caleb said. "That is a very low standard," Connor muttered, eyes flying over the incoming data. Syl stood near the central relic console, one hand pressed to the glowing surface, face washed pale by tactical projections. Earth filled the forward view, beautiful and exposed, and the weight of that sight hit her harder than any weapon. All this death had followed her bloodline across the stars. Every burning defense platform on the screen felt like a debt she had carried to someone else's front door. Caleb crossed the bridge without a word and stopped in front of her. The alarms, the shouting, the barrage outside, all of it seemed to drop back one step while he looked at her. "This is my fault," Syl whispered. "No," Caleb said, firm enough to cut through the whole room. "This is their choice. They came because of me. They came because tyrants always come when they think they can frighten people into kneeling." He reached up, touched the side of her face with soot-rough fingers, and lowered his voice. Earth doesn't kneel. We argue. We improvise badly. We survive out of spite. You did not bring them here to win. The breath she took trembled on the way in, steadied on the way out. She leaned into his hand for the smallest moment, a private motion in the middle of a collapsing sky. You make reckless confidence sound almost sacred. That's because I practice. From the system's pit, Connor didn't look up. Please save the emotionally stabilizing romance until after I prevent planetary vaporization. Can you? Sarah asked. Connor flashed her a grim smile. I can probably make it inconvenient. He had the artifact open across 3 linked interfaces, its fractured star map data pouring through human-built processors that absolutely resented the assignment. Symbols ran down the screens in cascading bands of impossible geometry. He fed the corrupted patterns through neural mimicry loops, cross-referenced them against dreadnought architecture, and finally slapped one panel hard enough to wake the rest. The ship answered. Lights surged along the command deck. Hidden weapons systems unfolded beneath the hull with a deep metallic shudder. Range arcs multiplied. Shield harmonics sharpened. Entire sections of the dreadnought that had been dormant since burial suddenly came alive, as if they had merely been waiting for someone stubborn enough to ask correctly. Connor stared at the new tactical layer blooming across his screen. Oh, you gorgeous ancient psychopath. Jackson looked over his shoulder. Good news. The best kind, Connor said. The kind involving unauthorized firepower. Down in the weapons bay, Zeke locked his oversized plasma cannon into place and gave the rotating barrel an affectionate smack. All right, he told it. Today we defend humanity, embarrass an empire, and try not to explode in a way that leaves paperwork. Maya's voice came over the local comm. That last part sounds optional in your tone. It is aspirational. The dreadnought dropped fully into the battle. Sarah drove it straight between an Imperial spearhead and a damaged defense platform just as a spread of plasma lances came screaming in. The ancient shields flared silver. The whole bridge rattled. Earth Command lit up their comms in overlapping panic. Unknown vessel, identify. Chloe slid into the communications array and pushed both palms against the controls. I've got this. She routed their captured battle footage, Imperial telemetry, and weapons analysis straight into every open military and civilian network she could reach. Images of slaver executions, Empire ship layouts, shield vulnerabilities, and targeting habits flooded Earth's command channels in seconds. Her voice rang across the broadcast, young but steady. This is human vessel dreadnought actual. The invasion fleet bleeds from the ventral shield seams. Their command ships overprotect the center, and they panic when formation timing breaks. Stop letting them choose the rhythm. For 3 heartbeats, nothing. Then Earth answered. Missile grids shifted. Orbital cannons corrected. A cluster of old human frigates turned like street fighters who had just learned where the expensive armor didn't cover the ribs. The Vanguard formation buckled under the sudden pressure. Sarah grinned. They learn fast. Of course we do, Caleb said. We invented last-minute bad ideas. One enemy cruiser broke from a main line and climbed above the defensive ring, shields glowing as it lined up a clear bombardment path toward major population centers. The tactical display painted its payload in brutal red. If that ship fired, cities died. Connor swore. Its shield generator is nested inside the upper spine. Long range won't punch through in time. Caleb was already moving. Then we go inside. Syl looked at him once and nodded before he even finished the thought. That was the strange beauty of them now. Fewer explanations. Faster trust. Ethan met them at the boarding lock, slamming a fresh power cell into his rifle. Tell me we have a sane plan. We have a fast one, Caleb said. Worse. Much. Connor arrived last, handing Caleb a magnetic spike charge and Syl a compact relay knife shaped from relic alloy. The cruiser's internal shield grid is layered. You'll need to sever 3 nodes manually. I'm feeding you paths, but once you're in there, improvise. Caleb smirked. Music to my ears. The boarding pod launched under covering fire. A metal bullet shot through chaos. Outside the narrow viewport, Earth rolled beneath them, cloud bands glowing with reflected war. Syl sat across from Caleb, strapped into place, her blade across her knees, her eyes full of fear and purpose and something fierce enough to stand beside both. He reached across the cramped space and took her hand. "Still with me?" She squeezed back. "Until the stars go out." The pod slammed into the cruiser's hull hard enough to crack teeth. Charges blew. Smoke rushed in. Caleb, Syl, and Ethan burst through the breach into a corridor full of stunned Imperial Marines. And somewhere deeper inside the ship, the shield generator began to wake.